We're beginning the second part of the Avnei Yesod Habayit Yehudi, the fundamentals of a Jewish home, which is the family purity laws, Dinei Taharat HaMishpacha. Before we begin with the various details, the halachot, which will last, I estimate or so, I'm going to give tonight an introduction about what these ideas of Tumah and Tahara are, what is behind them. First and foremost, we need to clarify that the dinim of Tumah and Tahara, of purity and impurity, lies in the realm of Chukim. As I've mentioned several times, there are various types of commandments, one of them being the category of Chukim, which are decrees. Decrees meaning that there is no reasonable explanation given in the Torah or elsewhere. If anything, it is very mystical. Doesn't mean that it does not have an explanation. There's a reason for everything, but it is beyond our understanding. Nevertheless, there are some ideas that are mentioned in various commentaries in the Gemarot and in the Zohar about what these ideas mean, and we're going to be talking about it tonight. But this particular category, because it is a chok, rabbis tell us that the chokim, traditionally and regularly, the Yetzer Hara in Umot HaOlam, the nations of the world, continuously and regularly attempt to discourage us from fulfilling them by making fun of them, and making fun of us who do these things that don't make any sense. Therefore, these particular mitzvot that are called chukim would offer a very, very big challenge for a Jew to fulfill, especially during difficult times. Here you have the Yetzer Hara trying to discourage him. Doesn't make any sense. What are you doing it for? And Umot HaOlam, the nations of the world, making fun, the Jew, for doing things that don't make any sense, don't have any rationale. So traditionally, these particular mitzvot have been the most challenging ones because of the reasons I just mentioned. They're illogical, difficult to comprehend, and we have the Yetzer Hara, the nations of the world, trying to interfere with our fulfilling them at all times. On the other hand, because these mitzvot are very challenging, then you can imagine that any Jew that fulfills the mitzvot and never wavers is demonstrating his utmost devotion to Judaism. In other words, if one is willing to do something which is difficult for another individual, it shows that he cares for him. He has a concern. He's a true friend. The more so in our relationship with Borei Olam, with the Almighty. If we're willing to do mitzvot that we do not understand, are classified as chukim, as decrees, only because He said so, even in the most difficult time, the most challenging situation, shows true devotion. And Am Yisrael throughout the ages has shown tremendous mesut nefesh, as I will elaborate soon, in fulfilling this particular mitzvah, the various halachot that concern Taharat HaMishpacha. Let me tell you a recent story. It's not so recent, but before communism came down, it was very difficult to have a mikveh in Russia. Communist government came out against anything that was Jewish. Getting a permit to build a mikveh was unheard of. So it had to be done secretly. And there was an American, I believe it was an American, visiting Russia at the time. He met up with some Jewish families. And at the end of their conversation, right before he was about to leave the home, the Russian friend tells him, let me show you something. And before he goes over to the closet, he makes sure that nobody else is looking, takes him to the closet, removes some heavy boxes, and there was a false door on the floor, which he removed, and there were stairs where they both went down. He showed them, this is where the mikveh 40 families make use of. And it was very, very difficult to put together. Just imagine the difficulties that they had in not arousing suspicion. How do you eliminate the dirt? How do you buy cement without arousing any suspicion? What are you using it for? After all, this is a communist country, which means that the house that you have does not belong to you. And if you're caught, you go to jail for defacing this property. And also doing something Jewish on top of that. Siberia. So it was very, very difficult. But over time, they were able to do it. And of course, it was a secret that they held very tight amongst the families. And this is what they made use of in communist Russia. As you know, a mikveh is not something which is easily built. There are many conditions for it, and we don't have the time to go through all the details. But one of the most important is that it be rainwater. You can't just tap water. You can't use a bathtub. It has to be rainwater. It can't just be rainwater you collect in a bucket. It has to be rainwater that goes direct into the bore, into the pit, without human intervention. It has to be water that is standing. It has to be part of the ground. It can't be a receptacle that you can move around like a tub. Various conditions. Of course, once you have required amount of rainwater, which is approximately 100 gallons, you can connect those 200 gallons to another pit, fill that pit with regular tap water, and connect the two borot, or the two ditches, by a 2-inch hole where the water is. And once the water is for a few moments, they have been connected. And by connecting those two waters, you are making the tap water now a kosher mikveh. That is one of the methods used to make mikvahot today, simply because you don't want to use only the original 40 se'ah of rainwater, because after a while it gets dirty. And if you live in a place like Phoenix, Arizona, where you don't have too much rain, that rainwater is going to be used up very quickly. So you need to have new water all the time, so you can clean out the other pit, the other ditch that has the top water when it gets dirty by filtering and cleaning it, and then reconnecting the other board, the board that has the megashamim, the rainwater. Like this, you don't have to or immerse yourself in the actual original stock to start with. Either 200 gallons, right? Over time, hopefully, sure, depending where you live. There are various ways to get around it. I mean, there are some authorities that allow the transportation of snow in places where there is no rain. Snow in its form, because it's not water, snow, even though you're transporting an intervention involved, because it's snow at this point, eventually it would melt and become water. That if that's the only way you can have in a desert, it's possible to do that. Same thing with ice and so forth. But for the most part, it takes a little while to put it into the various. Now you can understand why it was a very difficult thing to do for people who lived in Russia. Not only because of the communism, but even before communism, when the waters freeze, it would go to a natural mikveh. You use the ocean. Some rivers, not every. Depends if the waters of the river are from the rain or if water is coming from spring. Because a ma'ayan, a spring, can have running water. A mikveh cannot have running; it has to be standing. So depending on the river, they would be able to use sometimes the river, but during winter the rivers would freeze. So they would have an additional difficulty of perhaps walking a long distance till they got to the river. And once they got to the river, of breaking the ice, was frozen, immersing, just so they can imagine the difficulty becoming clean, but in realizing at the same time how important the continuous survival of the Jewish people. Without it, you could not have children. Yeah, lake is fine. Standing, it's not running. It's a big mix. I think I've discussed this in the past. I might as well mention again. One of the most exciting things that archaeologists have found when they dug up Masada was they found 2 mikvaot, not 1, 2. Imagine, this is a place where the Jewish people are fighting for survival, their physical survival, and all they have in mind to fight off the Romans, who sooner or later are going to get there. And they had time to build not 1 but 2 mikvaot, which of course were kosher, according to the most stringent opinion. 2 they found that were perfectly good mikvaot that could be used for, not just for men, for women too. And this is during very difficult conditions and circumstances. Nevertheless, they realized the importance of this, didn't give this up whatsoever. You can understand also why the halakha says that if you're building a community, the first thing to build is not a shul. A shul you can have in your living room. In anybody's home, people can get together in minyan and pray. The first thing a community is obligated to build, because as I just said, the survival of the Jewish people depends on purity. Without this, husband and wife cannot live together. No children can come about. So you can understand, you can appreciate the importance of this, even in a place like Masada, where life had to continue. And that was the first thing they took upon themselves to build. The mikveh is, by the way, of great significance in other areas of Judaism. For example, in conversion of a ger, convert to the Jewish faith. Or as we spoke about Tvilat Kelim, you buy a keli, a vessel that was manufactured by a non-Jew, depending on which materials it's made from. But for the most part, metals, the various types of metals, and glass require immersion in the Tevilah. And we explained that the idea behind the 2, Tevilah of a ger and Tevilah of Kelim, because they're coming from the Reshut HaTum'ah to the Reshut HaKdusha. They're going from the Tum'ah, from the pure side, and coming in that transition, that change requires so the mikveh is a very powerful symbolic identity. It gives an identity to this individual that he now belongs to, whether it's a ger or whether it's a keli. And we will see it also applies to a woman herself when she goes through that period that herself. A tremendous change occurs in her as soon as she immerses herself in them. Anybody know when else is a mikveh used? Other than for the woman, and for the ger, and for kelim? No, that's for a woman. That's the same thing. What is that? Oh, exactly. Men also go to the mikveh when? Erev Shabbat, Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippurim, or if they are scribes who write Sifrei Torah Mezuzot, there's a custom, a tradition to immerse in the mikveh prior to writing. Some do it more often than others. Some go to the mikveh regularly every single day. The idea of the mikveh is to bring about a certain kedusha on the person. Now, it's not only for tum'ah, because the tum'ah, there's various levels of tum'ah, which I will explain later. Today, for the highest and most serious form of tum'ah, which is tum'ah of amet, we have no way of becoming clean. We would need efer paradumah, the ashes of the red heifer. Nevertheless, even though we don't have the ashes of the red heifer, the mikveh in itself, or a ma'ayan, a spring, which has many advantages over a mikveh, but we won't get into it right now, either one of the two is a tremendous way of becoming pure. Regardless of the fact that we don't have the effort, it still does a tremendous good to a man or a woman to immerse himself in it. No, regardless, depending on what he's doing. Even if he did not get close to him, just before Shabbat, before Rosh Hashanah, before Kippur, or for a scribe before he's about to write Torah. No, a single girl is not allowed to go to me. Well, never, until she gets married. And if I don't remember to explain why, remind me. I'll talk about it a little right before she gets married. What is that? Funeral? What about? The person himself, the individual who is immersed in mikveh tahara as well, to cleanse him, right before they bury him. Right, everybody. A deceased person, niftar, prior to the burial, putting him in the ground, there is what's called tahara. They clean him up, they put him in a mikveh, and they dress him up with tachrichim, with rounds. No, the mikveh doesn't become tameh. If the mikveh has 40 se'ah, 200 gallons of rainwater, the mikveh does not become tameh. On the contrary, the mikveh is so powerful that it's mitaher, it cleanses everybody else who is tameh. No, that's a special mikveh just for the dead. Yeah, we don't use the same mikveh for the two. No. But of course it has to be tahor. Okay, so I just described to you what goes on a little bit, the significance of the mikveh. We still have to understand a little bit of the root of what the purpose of it, what does it accomplish, why Hashem commanded a woman more than anybody else to immerse herself. After all, this is what we'll be speaking about in the next couple of weeks, the various mitzvot, halachot, that every married couple needs to know, and therefore I hope that there's nobody here unless because we will be talking about very sensitive in the following week. Yeah, but today is only an introduction, so I'm not that good. But in the following weeks, don't necessarily bring your young friends, your children, because this is very, very sensitive. We're going to be getting into all the details that husband and wife need to know, but especially the women. They need to be aware of these halachot more than anything. Okay, so let's begin with the source, with some of the reasoning behind this mitzvah. What's going on when we talk about Tumah and Tahara? What does this come from? What does it mean that there is a pure force, a force of purity? Yusha, Tahara, Tumah, very, very mystical concept. So we have to go back to the very, very beginning, to Het Adam Harishon, the very, very first recorded incident in the Torah where there is an Avirah. What's an Avirah? A rebellion against the Almighty. Adam and Chava did not follow the instructions that they were given, not to eat the tree. So if you read the story, you think it's just a fairy tale, a plain story, but there's a lot in that story. Tremendous depth, which the Kabbalah talks about more in detail. But basically what happened there was man and his wife rebelled. They did not follow the instructions, the very simple instructions that were given. Instead, they obeyed, or they followed the Nahash. The Nahash symbolizes the Yetzer Hara, that power in the world that always tempts man to rebel against God, to not follow God's instruction. And he, in that case the Nahash, succeeded convincing Chava, who later convinced her husband. As a result of that rebellion, of that Avirah, man fell from his original state into a much more degraded state. Yarad, he fell. 1. 2, he got thrown out, kicked out, to use that word, from Gan Eden. And number 3, he became mortal. You know what mortal means? That now he dies. After a number of years spending this world, he dies and decomposes. He's gone. Except for this would not have been had he not sinned. In other words, there was a different type of blueprint that God prepared for the world had there not been a rebellion. This is the state that we will be in. This original blueprint when after Mashiach comes, especially after Tehiyat HaMetim, we will go back to the original plan of a perfect world. So what do we have now after the sin of Adam Rishon? An imperfect world. It's important to remember this idea of imperfection, because that's what Tumah really represents. Tumah is a state of perfection. Kedusha is a state of perfection. And why is that? Because Kedusha tavi'ah latachlit, that Tumah marchika min hatachlit. If you want to know the basic difference between Kedusha and Tumah, Kedusha brings you closer to the end result, to the tachlit, to the goal of humanity, of man, to what the Almighty expects of us. It brings us closer to God. And Tumah is just the opposite. It's a power out there. You can call it an energy, you can call it evil force, whatever you want to call it, that draws us away from Kedusha, draws us therefore away from the tachlit, from the real purpose of what life is. How do we see the various things that happened to Adam Rishon? Well, it's obvious. If you read the Torah, that he was thrown out from Gan Eden, that is very clear. It says so in the Torah. But what does it mean to be thrown out? That he's become distant from the Almighty. He doesn't have the same relationship. Things are not as obvious to him anymore that God exists. He thinks he's by himself. He's the boss. There's nobody on top. In other words, there's been a certain hastarat panim, we'd call it. A certain harhaka, distance between the Almighty and us. He's still around. He still oversees us, but we don't see. We're in a lower state. The fact that we've come down in a level is also noticeable from from the fact that right now human beings are ashamed of their nakedness. Before the height of Adam Arishon, Adam and Chava moved around without any clothing. It was normal and it was natural. I know today people do that too in places like Scandinavia, but that's for other reasons. Back then, it was not quite natural, and there was nothing to be embarrassed of. Now, after the height of Adam Rishon, man all of a sudden became aware of his why. What does that prove? What's wrong with that? Why is he all of a sudden concerned? He doesn't want to see. He doesn't want anybody to see him go to the restroom. What is he ashamed of? Because when man sees his nakedness, it reminds him that he's just as low as an animal. Because he sees the similarity in himself and an animal. An animal eats and expels the food, and so does he. Right? In other words, he basically sees the animal in him, which degrades him. He used to be, in some ways he still is, the Nezer Abriah, the crown of creation, a very special creature that God created that has abilities beyond anything else in the most important ability is called free will, which animals don't have. They work and they live by instinct. And here you have a human being that was given a different task, a very special thing. In a way, he's a partner. All of a sudden, he's ashamed of himself. That he's just like... So that nakedness is one of the ways that proves or reminds mankind that he's in a lower state, in a state of... Yeah, things happen very quickly on the first day. That's right, on that day. But things happen in a relatively fast pace. Like that's hard to... But that's the Midrash. So we don't try to figure it out. How did it happen so quickly? It just happened. Maybe that hour with a longer hour has some... Anyway, so that was man's way of seeing his lower state, by seeing his nakedness, and by having to toil, to work hard for a living. As the Torah says, man is cursed. Things will not come to you, which means what? You are being reminded that you're in a state of, you have to work hard. Things are no longer given. In other words, it's imperfect. Life is not perfect. How about the woman? Same thing with the woman. The woman is reminded of her imperfection by the way she gives birth and to the menstrual cycle. As I will explain soon, this is a form of imperfection, and it's a reminder to her of her. It's a constant. And the fact that man is mortal, that is the fact that everybody dies. Nobody can escape death. So all of these demonstrate the imperfection all women have in this world. Now this state of imperfection, what it also means is that man now is capable of becoming tameh. If he comes in contact with something clean, he becomes tameh just like that, the source. You touch a source that is unclean, you become unclean just like it. When the human being, especially the Jew, when his neshama departs, he becomes tameh. Because the ruach hatumah, this impure force, immediately tries to take over this empty vessel. So long as this vessel contains a holy neshama is Kedusha, the tumah cannot just invade this body. Now that this body is empty, the tumah is able to invade it. But while one is alive, while a Jew is alive, the only way he can become coming in contact. There are various types of tumot. One is the tumah of a met, of a dead person, which is the highest form, which means that if you are in the same room as a dead man, even if you don't touch him, hamet metameh be'ohel, the met can make one unclean just by being in the same ohel. That is why a Kohen needs to immediately leave the room if somebody gets a heart attack or dies. He cannot be in the same room. A Kohen cannot be in the same room, in a mortuary. When there's a funeral, he has to be away if he wants to attend. He can't just go into any cemetery. He has to be away from the graves. He cannot come in contact. There are certain halachot that apply to him. He's not allowed to. Doesn't mean that we don't become tamim, those of us who are not kohanim. We do become, but it's permissible for us to do so. There's no law, there's no prohibition. No, even the tzaddikim graves. What? There's an opinion about the Kivrei Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and the very big tzatuma. Yeah, no. We are careful. We don't allow get near it. No, there's no problem. For anybody who's not a Kohen, there's no problem becoming tameh. There's no prohibition in the Torah. And if he did become tameh, during the time that we had the red heifer, he would make himself clean. Why would he want to become clean? If he wanted to enter certain parts of the Beit HaMikdash, or if he was a Kohen, if Rumah, he could not do so if he was unclean. There would be various reasons for Israel to want to become clean too. Today that we don't have the red heifer, one still wants to become as possible by going to the mikveh. It doesn't mean that after being at a cemetery he has to go to the mikveh. Right, the tumah enters the body. Right? So, there's also tumah, sure. Tumah in the grave, sure. So you if you want to get close and you're a Kohen, if you're not a Kohen, there's no problem. You're allowed to touch it. If you're not a Kohen, there's no problem for one to become tameh. That's okay. You can touch the body too. There's no prohibition. For a Kohen, there's a prohibition. The only time a Kohen is allowed to become unclean
is if a dead Jew's body somewhere in the field and there's nobody else to bury him, he's obligated to forget about his priesthood for a moment, for that status that he has. Get involved with burying this Jew. It's a mitzvah. Right, some close relatives, not for the Kohen Gadol, but for a regular. Anyway, so what all the tumot have in common, whether it's a met, which is a more serious form of tumah because tameh afilu be'ohel, or whether it's metzorah, who had a type of leprosy, biblical times, or whether it's a zav, midah, all the various types of tumot, even though they're various levels, what they all have in common is that they stem, or they come from the nahash. The nahash is a symbolic animal, reptile, that brought about the sin, that tempted man to sin or to rebel against the Almighty. They exist in this world from Him. He is representative and symbolic of them. And in today's terms, we don't use the word nahash, we use the word yetzer hara. In the same way that the tum'ah is capable of making unclean by touching it, by getting in contact with it, in the same way the yetzer hara attempts to touch us, in other words, to influence and remove us from the kedusha, from the fulfillment of the mitzvot. Still has a tum'ah, but it's not the same form of it. You still should not go to a non-Jewish cemetery. Okay, so now that we spoke a little bit about tum'ah, what it is and where it comes from, we need to realize that what a woman does when she immerses herself, mikveh, is to drive away this tum'ah. In other words, the tum'ah that comes about in a very sensitive place, a place where life is born, where a child comes out from. She, by having committed the sin of Chet Adam Harishon, brought about death, right? As a result of that chet, man became mortal, right? So in that same spot where life comes about, she has a mini death occurring once a month. Why do I call it a mini death? Because for those of you who studied biology, understand what happens to a woman. The reason why there is blood once a month is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu prepares in the woman's body a membrane. I'm going to try to use the best words that I can come up with. It's sort of membrane that should be able to feed and to protect and to allow the eggs and everything else there to grow and to become into an embryo. So that membrane that is being prepared and growing, that will have a function, a very important function with this potential embryo. If there is no potential embryo, if nothing came about from all the various components that were there in place once a month, that bloody membrane has no more use, and it falls apart. And that's where you see the blood. In other words, the blood flow is basically the falling apart of that membrane, which has no more use. That potential life, therefore, is a form of death. In other words, there's no life coming out of this. It's only a form of... Now, by a woman, this form of death, or this tum'ah, is red, it's blood. In a man, there is also a form of death, but not as serious, and that's called the zera, which is white and not red, which is very interesting. The Kabbalah discusses this a little bit more in depth. I will only say the following, that red is much more serious than white. White, if anything, is representative of cleanliness, of tahara. Red is representative of din, of judgment, and it also means life. So a woman, by having this menstrual cycle once a month, is continuously reminded of the chet, and is also reminded of the fact that she needs a tikkun. That tikkun is the immersion in the mikveh that she has to go through. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about more on the practical level, on why Hashem did this for a woman who's married. Right now, we only spoke about even a single woman who goes through this cycle, and she cannot get in. Now, the reason, since I already mentioned it right now, I'll explain it a little bit more in detail. A single woman cannot go through this immersion when she's still single, because the real reason behind the cohabitation or the relationship between a man and a woman is for producing children, right? So long as a woman is still single and there's no children contemplated, if she were to immerse herself in a mikveh, this will bring about prostitution. The fact that she's not allowed to immerse herself in a mikveh while she's still single is a way to prevent her from being with a man. For not the right reason, because the right or the real reasons or the main purpose of their being together, what we call the zivug, is to bring about children into this world. So long as that does not exist, that is not yet relevant, she's still single, the mikveh is out of limits for her, a single girl, regardless of the situation, kippur or whatever. She's not allowed to go. She needs to remain in nidah until the day of the. What does the word nidah mean? It means distant. During the time that she becomes a nidah, that she becomes tame'ah, she is distant. Not distant from Hashem necessarily, distant from her husband. While she is single,
there's a certain distance too. Especially during the olden days, people were very careful with a woman who was a nidah. They didn't get too close to her. She would sleep in a separate room because they believed in all sorts of superstitious beliefs that there's some negativity coming out from it. Even though there's some truth about the various influences that tumah has on its surroundings, in Jewish tradition we were not too concerned about it, except for maga, except for touching. The touching, or the eating something which was holy, or the entering a place like the Bet HaMikdash, which was a holy, was off limits to one who was nidah, even if she was single. So in those days, being a single nidah was relevant too, because of the certain limitations imposed on you. Today, the main limitation is for a married woman, which I'll talk about soon. In any event, we still need to be aware that a woman is a nidah, or she is distant from man, or from her husband when she's married. That is the idea behind the name nidah, distant. And she has to maintain that distance if she's married for a number of days until she's able to go into a mikveh. Yeah. Yes. And because a single woman is also considered a nidah, nobody's allowed to touch her. In other words, men are not allowed to touch single women after they have become nidot, which is about 11, 12, 13 years of age, depending on the girl. Family members is different. The reason with those who are not your family members, because of what can come about as a result of close proximity. Right. Because there's something called irva. Irva is somebody that is not permissible for you to get married. In other words, a relative of yours, a very close relative, like a daughter, or a sister, or a mother, right? You can never marry anyone. There's no possibility of marrying. Not only is it prohibited, it doesn't, by nature, one does not even consider it. Nature does not allow for a human being to in that direction. I know there's some sickos out there, right, who do all sorts of weird things, but nature regularly does not put that desire into a human being, think about marrying or being with his daughter. So therefore, that distance or that prohibition does not apply to. Whereas with others who are not his direct relatives, there is a possibility that they may be, one may want to marry them. And as a result of that, so long as they're in a state of impurity, and there's no kiddushin, and there's no real marriage, the cohabiting together would be znut, would be prostitution, plus it would be the tum'ah, with impurity, without any kiddusha. In other words, there would be many problems involved with this type of a relationship. So, Torah prohibited this type of union, so long as that there's no kiddushin and there's no ta'ah. Whereas with touching, because it could bring about this not permissible union, but this potential union. Follow me? It's a potential, but it's not permissible. They therefore said it's prohibited to touch, to kiss, to hug, and the likes. And therefore, those who engage in these kind of things, of course, are committing an isur, unless it's a very close relative. Yes. If a woman continuously went to the mikveh and is already past the menopause, where she stopped seeing blood, then the last mikveh made her clean and she remains clean. If a woman never went to she's now 75 years old, sees no more blood, she's still teme'ah, she's still impure until she goes to so you can have a balat shuvah, a woman who's doing teshuvah at the age of 65 or so. She has to go to the mikveh, even though she has no blood in it. She never did, to bring her out of that state. So a woman who is a divorcee, because she doesn't live with a man, she doesn't have that requirement with a widow. But if she were to want to eat terumah, there would be a situation where she would want to enter a place that is kadosh. She would need to, since that does not apply to them for the most part. They do not go unless there's a need. She's married. All right, let's go on. So this immersion of the mikveh for a woman is to drive away the tum'ah. She does so by entering water. Water is a source of life. So the tum'ah, the dam, is a form of death, and water is a form of life. It gives life. Water also, not only does it give life, it's a cleansing agent, and also in water, air cannot enter water. The tum'ah is a form of air, even though it's not physically air. It's like air. You cannot put air into water, right? Any air you put into water goes up. So there are various ideas here of what the water is doing to drive away this tum'ah. But why does it have to be 200 gallons? Why rainwater? These are of course ideas beyond us. Understand why it's a requirement. We know that in order for this water to drive away tum'ah, it has to have certain qualities. And one of them is the rainwater, and a certain amount of it, in certain conditions. Then it has the ability to drive away this. Whereas a regular bath, a jacuzzi, or a swimming pool, they cannot accomplish. Water also brings about change, and that is the idea of why a ger, when he converts, to go through the immersion, because it brings about a change of status. Man also is composed of water, and that by immersing himself into the water, it's like he's going through a change of sorts. And finally, when a woman immerses herself in a mikveh, she's like reconnecting herself to the river of Eden. Remember, man was driven away from Eden? By immersing herself into the water, she's like reconnecting herself to that source where she was taken away from. This is the basic overview on Tum'ah and Tahara, what is accomplished when one enters the mikveh, whether it's for a man or a woman. These ideas are very deep ideas. Nevertheless, they exist, and we need to reckon with them. They're not simple matters. They affect our daily lives. When we had a Bet HaMikdash, they affected us a lot. In the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking about the halachot of mikveh, of tevilah, of immersing, of the actual archakot of nidah. In other words, what happens to a husband and wife during that time. So let me just spend a few minutes about the advantages of being teme'ah. Right? Up until now, I spoke about how depressing it might be, how it's a lower status, a lower state, how it reminds us of the Het Adam Harishon. Now you will see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu accomplishes many, many things with one mitzvah. This idea of Tum'ah, which appears to be very negative because of what it represents and what it reminds, nevertheless has tremendous benefits for a married couple. The following weeks we'll be speaking about it, so it's important for us to understand that this is good, it's not bad. How is it good? First of all, many divorces, especially in the Gentile world, believe it or not, come about because husband and wife become bored. They got too used to each other, it becomes boring, and that is why many of them want to try out different things. It's boring. What does the Torah say? I'm going to separate the husband and wife for 12 days or so, and guess what's going to happen after 11, 12 days? You're going to have a second honeymoon. So that is one of the things that the Torah is trying to do, is to preserve physically the marriage, that the bond, the physical bond, should always be strong, the physical, in order for that physical bond not to dissipate, not to become boring, to become exciting. Hashem regenerates that physical bond once a month. And that has been attested to by just about any couple that I've spoken. That it's true, it's a fact. In order to appreciate that, you have to be. That is number one. Number two, during those days that a woman is unclean, something happens. The relationship is being tested on a spiritual level. Can there still be affection? Can there still be warmth and attention? All of these are not physical. All of these characteristics are spiritual. Can they still care for each other on this level, the spiritual? That relationship is being tested. Because to a marriage, there's a lot more than just physical relationship. A physical relationship is very important. That's what part of a marriage is all about. But there's a lot more. And the Torah says, you know what? You need to get together on a spiritual plane too. There are other things that need to bond you, and that need to be preserved. When the physical is not there, you're given a chance to bond together spiritual. That can only happen when the physical is there. And number three, which we've spoken about before, Hashem gives the opportunity for the woman to make a tikkun of sorts, to remove that tum'ah that she brought about by driving it away by murder. So these three ideas come about at the same thing, that those 11 or 12 days that a woman is separated. And last but not least, I think this one is one of the most important ones of all. The very idea of mikveh symbolizes kedusha in its many forms, whether it's for a man or whether it's for a woman. And this has a very important message to us, husband and wife relationship. The husband and wife relationship, we call the zivug between them, the intimate relationship, is a holy relationship. Many people, many cultures thought of it as something unclean and unpleasant, something not to be desired. That's why Catholics, the nuns and the priests supposedly don't get married. That's ridiculous. Even though we know that they don't maintain their celibacy. I use the right word. They claim they do, but they don't. Nevertheless, our tradition says just the opposite, that this form, this relationship, this physical relationship, believe it or not, is a holy relationship. You know why? Because when a husband and a wife are together, they have the ability to do something incredible, and that is to bring down a neshama, mishamayim. That is a tremendous thing. People don't think about that. That's a wonder in itself, but it's also much more than a wonder. The ability to bring down a neshama kedosha from heaven is a tremendous responsibility. Therefore, the husband and wife need to go to great lengths to make sure that they do so b'kedusha v'tahara, because they will be determining what neshama comes to the body and how that neshama will behave. In the future, believe it or not, depends on the timing that the husband and wife were together, the kavanot that they had, what their thoughts were, and how they prepared towards this very holy moment. In order for me to prove to you how this is so important, I'm going to share with you an incredible story that happened about 10 years ago. There was a young man that went over to a woman in the middle of the street, tried to tear away her necklace, and in the process of doing so, choked her to death. She died. He was taken to court, and he was arraigned. His mother came to court with him, and the judge begins to read the accusation against him. You're being accused of having murdered this woman, and the judge says the name of that woman. As soon as he said the name of the woman that this young man killed, his mother fainted. So they asked the woman, what happened? Why did you faint? So she told a story that happened 17 years ago. This boy was 17 years ago. The time came for me to go to them, and I came late. And when I came, the woman who takes care of the mikveh, the balanit, was closing up. She said, I have to go to a wedding. I'm in a rush. I'm sorry. I can't wait for it. And the mother says, and I begged her that my husband will not want to wait an extra day. Please let me in. And she did not budge. This child was born as a result of that night. In other words, without tahara, without mikveh. And when I heard the name of this woman, I fainted, because that's the same woman who locked me out of the mikveh. That woman that locked me out of the mikveh was the one who was killed by my son, who was born the tum'ah without going to the... Yes, the character, the nature of a child is greatly influenced by kedusha of the parents. The moment a husband and wife are together is a very meaningful moment, a moment of kedusha that can contribute and greatly influence what neshama will come down and how that neshama will conduct himself in this world. Besides this, doctors have said that those women who keep the family purity laws are healthier. They do not get as sick in the womb. You know, there are different diseases in the womb, and those women who are careful with taharat mishpacha stay away from their husbands during that time, go to the mikveh at the end of that period, usually statistically are spared from. So we see all around the various benefits that the Torah had in mind when it imposed on us, decreed that a woman is teme'ah for a number of days, that a husband is not allowed to be with her. Husband, of course, who is with his wife while she's teme'ah, not only is chayav karet, not only that it's true, this avon, a bo'el nida, becomes tameh himself. He becomes tameh with a very, very high level of tum'ah. So this does him a lot of damage in this world and a lot of damage in the world to come. And it's something which is very difficult to repair. Of course, there's teshuvah for everything, but it's a very difficult teshuvah for one who... Throughout history, of course, you can understand now why our mothers and grandmothers, b'mesirut nefesh, in other words, as difficult as it was, they went to great lengths to make sure that there is a mikveh in the community. And they used it even if it was cold outside, because this meant so much to Jewish survival. Without that, there could be no Jewish children. They would never think of having a child, the tum'ah, or being with their husband, or the other way around, the husband being with their wife. This is a tremendous avon. But we also saw the benefits of why the Torah requires this. There's quite a few benefits for the husband and wife to be apart, the number of days that they are apart. Strengthens the bond amongst others, and that has been proven. So the Goyim don't realize that we have a secret for a good marriage, or at least for strengthening it, and that is the act itself, the relationship itself, the physical relationship itself is held back for a number of days to give it time to rejuvenate and to strengthen the physical bond and the spiritual bond between husband and... Just want to mention one more point, and that is that we said before that a husband or a man also has a form of tum'ah, and that's called the zera, that comes out from him. Just like the woman has the blood that comes out, in that blood, as long as it's not it's the real blood that comes out of itameh. In the same way, a man has a form of tum'ah. It's on a different level. It's not at a high level as the nidah. But if that zera comes out and does not enter the woman, it's also a form of death, because that zera also contributes to life. A woman without a man cannot bear a child. A man without a woman cannot bear a child. They both contribute. As the rabbis tell us, there are three partners in the creation of a human being. Man contributes something, the woman contributes something, and God contributes the five senses besides the neshama. What happens when a person leaves this world? Hashem takes his part, leaves the part of it. So that part that the man contributes, if it does not enter the woman, it's also metah. And it's a tremendous avon, therefore. It's a tremendous sin for a man to engage in what's called zera levatala, to shed his seed in vain, because there's no life coming out of it. And this is a big problem, of course, for people, for men who are single, because of the many temptations and many problems of society, things that they see and that can lead to that. And that is why the rabbis warned us to stay away from those things that can bring about Halila, the zera levatala, which brings about tum'ah and causes a tremendous amount of distance that individual in Borei Olam. One who conducts himself in this manner, in other words, that he is careless with zera levatala, he's menudeh b'shamayim. They don't listen to his prayers. He's meluchlach. He soiled him with a form of tum'ah, and they ignore him. And therefore, he's putting himself in a low status, just like a nidah during the time that she has the blood. But during the time a woman has that blood, she's not in any way committing a sin. It is just a reminder of the past, something that she can remove when she goes to the mikveh. Anyone, therefore, who has that problem, has had that situation occur to him, I'm talking about the men, the best thing for them to do is to immediately go to the mikveh. Anyone who goes to the mikveh, after immediately having such a situation, is able to partially cure, partially remove that tumah from it. It's a little bit of a teshuvah. It's not complete, but it helps him a little bit. Anyway, the mikveh for both men and women is a very, very powerful way of cleansing oneself. Even though we don't have the red heifer today, it is still something that those who go regularly, especially the men, they will elevate themselves on a very high levels of kiddush. We have a tradition that those who go regularly, they cleanse and attain tremendous levels of kedusha. And this, of course, is why the Sofrim, the scribes, make it a habit before they write Sefer Torah, Mezuzot, to do so b'kedusha, to immerse themselves, so that their words that they put in writing are more effective, are more powerful. Imagine being a Hazan, immersing yourself in the mikveh before you're a Hazan. It does it gives a tremendous boost of kedusha to the individual. So it's a very good thing to get used to. But we're not required. It's not obligated except for Erev Yom Kippur. When we want to be completely cleansed before we ask for Selicha, Mechila, Mechapara on the Day of Atonement, then everybody is required to. But throughout the year, whoever can get used to it at least once a week for Chod Shabbat, Tavo Alav Bracha. It's a tremendous act of Kedusha, which can only benefit. The women, of course, don't have that requirement except for once a month to remove the tumah. Once they've done that, they don't have to concern themselves with going to the mikveh regularly on a daily. Man, of course, who has the many obligations, the many mitzvot, and the various temptations, may have more of a need. Shavuot, yes, there is an inyan litaher lifnei haregel, before every holiday. But there are those who go every day. And so what I'm saying is at least once a week or before the holidays, it's a very special thing. And it's a matter of getting used to it, it's a habit. If you get used to it, it becomes easy. Anyway, during the next couple of weeks, I just want to remind those who came late, because Hashem will be covering the details of the halachot of Tumah v'Tahara as they apply to Taharat HaMishpacha only. Because during that menstrual cycle where a woman needs to know that there's certain things she cannot do for her husband, and the other way around, there's certain things